Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Red Zone, brought to you by the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. I'm Haley Reeder, Communications Specialist. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2019. On this day in 1900, the state of Texas granted a charter to the Rosenberg Library Association of Galveston. The Rosenberg Library, successor to the Galveston Mercantile Library, which was founded in 1871, is the oldest public library in Texas in continuous operation. It opened in June 1904, and 1 year later, the Rosenberg absorbed the collections of the Galveston Public Library, thus formalizing its new role as the public library for the city of Galveston. Since that time, the library has compiled outstanding collections of manuscripts, maps, artifacts, and printed items. According to the National Hurricane Center, a storm developing in the Gulf of Mexico this week has a 90% chance of developing into a tropical depression or crater within the next couple of days. The disturbance is expected to produce storm surges and high-force winds, as well as up to 2 feet of heavy rainfall across the upper Texas coast. And in Texas, heavy rainfall often means flooding. With about 12% of the state's land mapped as a floodplain, Texans are no strangers to flooding. But during large storms like Hurricane Harvey, homes outside of high-risk areas still faced catastrophic flooding. Real Estate Center Research Economist Dr. Harold Hunt wrote ahead of the storm, New Ideas in Flood Protection, an article coming out in the July issue of Tierra Grande magazine. He joins us today to talk about the article, which discusses flood protection techniques. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for asking me.
So, what should a potential home buyer look for when shopping for homes in or near a flood-prone area?
Well, first of all, visually, it's really hard to tell if you're just walking around that the house is in a floodplain or not. So that's something that's going to be tough from the very beginning. You can try to check with a local flood insurance provider, and they have maps, and they can look on those maps. And if you don't know a local provider, you can probably go to anyone that sells homeowners insurance, and they can put you on to someone who sells flood insurance. Or if you just put into Google National Flood Insurance Program, they have a number, and you can call that number, and they'll give you a list of providers. And the cool thing is that the government sets the rate, so you don't need to comparison shop. The price will be the same no matter who provides it.
And how can a real estate professional help their clients navigate a purchase in these kinds of areas?
Well, I'd say, first of all, they might have a lot of local knowledge that you don't have. I mean, if you're not familiar with the market, you're with someone that should be very familiar, and so they can give you some indication as to whether areas have flooded or not if they're aware of it. The most frequently asked question after Harvey, the real estate professionals were saying, was the buyers wanted to know, did this house flood in Harvey? Mm-hmm. So it's something certainly that's on people's minds today. And then if you actually start to buy a house, you'll get a seller's disclosure statement. And on that disclosure statement, there are 3 boxes that the seller can check. One, they'll ask them, has there ever been any flooding in the house before? Another one is, do you know if you're in the 100-year floodplain? And then last of all, do you currently have any flood insurance? So you can look at that.
And in your article, Ahead of the Storm, New Ideas in Flood Protection, you discuss several different flood mitigation techniques. How can a homeowner determine which technique is best for them, and what are those techniques?
Well, the one probably you see most often is if you'll go to the beach or the coast and you see these homes that are actually elevated. They call that wet flood proofing. And what they do is just raise the house above where they think the flood waters will come, and so the water can just pass through underneath. Or if there's a crawl space in the house, they'll have vents where water can actually just pass through, and so the areas that are inhabited won't be harmed. The problem is, like in Houston, if you got an existing house and they're asking you to elevate it, then that can be done, but it's very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then another, obviously more expensive option is to dry flood-proof your house. So that would involve putting some kind of membrane around it. And the tricky part is going to be waterproofing your doors and windows. So that's also expensive.
What can renters do in preparation for a flood?
Well, renters can at least ask the property owner or the manager if the property's flooded before. They may or may not know, depending on how long they've been there. The other thing is you can certainly take out renter's insurance on your contents. Obviously, you don't own the property, so you're not going to take out any insurance on that, but you can protect your belongings. And then the last thing you can ask for, at least you may not get it, but you can ask them for a clause in your contract saying, if this property floods, I don't owe you any rent.
So tell me a little bit more about the 3 innovative flood protection structures outlined in your article. They're the Shure house, flood frame, and ground force.
Yeah, the Shure house is really cool. It was a project by some college students at the Stevens Institute of Technology, and they entered it in this contest that's held every 2 years. It's called the Solar Decathlon, put on by the Department of Energy. And they came up with a house that is actually flood-proof up to 6 feet, can hold 6 feet of water up on the sides of the home. The way they do that is they actually have some storm shutters that close, and they make the windows and the doors watertight. That was definitely an interesting project. It can be done as there's some specialty things to it, like the shutters, but a lot of the materials they use were just straight off the shelf. As far as flood frame, that's a waterproof cloth that gets deployed around the perimeter of the house, about 6 inches away. And what happens there is when the floodwaters start to rise, it automatically deploys this cloth and it pushes against your house, and it'll prevent the floodwaters from coming in that way. And they usually go up about 3 feet because any higher than that, and most houses, the structure can't stand water against it much higher than 3 feet. And then the last one, ground force, it's a modular product, but it's got a structural concrete floor, very different from the typical manufactured home or modular home. And what they do with those is they'll bring them on site and put steel piers at the corners. And the cool thing about that is you get to pick your elevation. And then later on, maybe, for example, in Houston, if they raise the elevation requirement, they can come back and just raise your house fairly easily. The other thing is you can actually move the house later on. If you want to take it somewhere else, all they do is come in and they cut the piers loose, and then you can relocate the home to another place.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Harold. You can read his article, Ahead of the Storm, New Ideas in Flood Protection, on our website. The link to it is on our podcast webpage and in the YouTube description box. That article will be in the July 2019 issue of Tierra Grande. All articles in the upcoming magazine are posted in our research library. Head online to read articles about topics like homeownership affordability, the effects of subprime lending, development in Waco, estate planning tools, and real estate disputes. Our research library is also home to several articles about floodplain regulations, hurricane recovery, and a guide for resources. We posted a link to all of those articles and more on our podcast webpage. That's going to be it for today's podcast. If you want more from the Real Estate Center, follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can also check out our website, www.recenter.tamu.edu, for the latest data, research articles, blogs, news, and more. For more podcasts like this one, you can subscribe to The Red Zone on iTunes or on our YouTube channel. All podcasts are also available for free on our website. Thanks for joining us today in the Real Estate Red Zone, brought to you by the Real Estate Center in College Station, Texas, where we've been helping Texans weather the storm since 1971. This is Haley Reeder, and I'll see you next time. Bye!